Is China going to collapse? The collapse of the CCP, the collapse of the Communist Party of China is imminent. They are ready to collapse. And what's going to take its place? What's going to actually take the place of the Communist Party of China when it collapses? This question has been burning my inbox for years now. I swear to God, every single day someone asks me, what's going to happen when the CCP collapses? Is it going to collapse? Look at all these warning signs. And I actually want to address it. I'm not going to dress it up in any sort of way. I'm not going to make it all dramatic and say, oh my gosh, we're on the brink of collapse, or oh no, China's about to take over the entire world. I'm going to tell you the straight up facts about what I think, what actually is going to happen within the Communist Party of China, and what are the global implications of that. Now, this really leads into something else, though, is if the Chinese government were to collapse, this hypothetical collapse, would I go back to China? That's a really simple answer. Absolutely, positively, I would. I never meant to leave China in the first place. I didn't want to leave. There was absolutely no reason for me to leave. I was having a great time. I was painting a human picture of the country for the rest of the world to see. And in fact, I inspired hundreds, if not thousands of people to go to China to either visit or work. So I absolutely would continue to do so because I love China. I love nearly everything about the country. In fact, I made it my life's mission to live and settle there. But that didn't work out because of the trajectory of the dictatorship, the way things went. So without that, if you remove those elements, of course I would love to go back to China. Absolutely, positively, overnight I would be back there. Of course, making 100% sure that I was welcome in the new government, whatever decided to take its place. But that leads me to something even more important. And that is the real question that I get pretty much on a daily basis is, when the CCP collapses, when the Chinese government collapses, what's going to take its place? And I have to tell you this. I'm absolutely not a fearmonger. I'm not a kind of person that likes to prey on people's emotions and stuff and say like, oh, everything's doom and gloom. China's going to take over the world. I absolutely don't think it's capable of doing so. But I do think that the Chinese government's absolutely capable of creating massive amounts of influence and damage around the world. And by the same token, a lot of people also expect me to say, oh, well, if that's the case, if the Chinese government's so incompetent with its propaganda and they're always making these stupid mistakes and for God's sakes, the other day, the Chinese government tried to pay me to promote Chinese propaganda. They didn't really fully look into who I was, apparently. When they make stupid mistakes like this, you say, well, the incompetence shows that they're not ready to take over the world. In fact, they're probably going to fragment and splinter and fall apart within their own country. So who's going to take over? And although I'd like to be super positive about this, I don't think the Chinese government's going anywhere. I don't think the CCP is going to collapse. I don't think that the Communist Party of China is even close to being in a position where it's truly worried about its future leadership. I think that it's very worried about certain elements of control within its borders, not allowing big protests to get out of control, not allowing any dissidents to take foothold, not allowing any sort of online message that they don't like to proliferate. But I would absolutely not say that they're losing any sort of power. The Chinese government's created mass apathy in the country. So number one, you feel like it's absolutely hopeless to try to stand up to this juggernaut of a government with over 90 million members in the CCP. But number two, you create a situation where people can't survive, period, if they go up against this juggernaut. And I'm not even talking about going up against it and taking out a placard in the street saying, I'm gonna burn myself if the Chinese government doesn't step down. I'm talking about people that are having idle conversations about how they don't like the leadership and how they don't like how things are going. If that message gets back to authorities, that person will be punished, right? And that's part and parcel part of the whole, social credit system and all this kind of framework that they're creating right now. But I don't think the Chinese government's really running out of control anytime soon. And number three, actually, I don't necessarily think it needs to completely collapse. I've never been one to say like, oh, we have to go down and take down the CCP entirely. I think it's much better for a country to liberalize without necessarily like straight up coercion. I'm not expecting some massive outside forces to go into China and say, oh, we're gonna change you from the inside out. I personally think it's much more healthy if the Chinese government were to liberalize, and it doesn't even need to change its like insignia and hammers and sickles and its name or anything like this. I think if the Chinese government were to behave itself and stop committing genocide and actually relinquish a lot of its control over freedom of speech and not be so paranoid about what its citizens can do on the global stage and have global conversations and stifling them, and actually allow real journalism and reporting and freedom of religion and all these things, if you were to allow these things, I reckon China would be not only a much better place to be, but a much more successful country as well, because it could finally exert some power around the world, some influence. When you don't allow Chinese people to be on the same global playing stage and able to communicate with people abroad, then of course there's not going to be any power exerted, because it turns out when it's only the government exerting that power around the world, like with propaganda and things like this, that's not cool. Nobody likes governments. Governments suck. Everyone hates government. It's like the boring square at school. It's like having your freaking parents as a chaperone at a school dance or something like this. Nobody likes governments. Governments are not cool. So you allow Chinese people to promote soft power with unfettered, unrestricted speech, and you're gonna have a better situation. So again, morphing into something that's behaving itself, and a government that allows its citizens to proliferate, to become good, to exercise their full potential. The Chinese people that I know are so talented, and if they were allowed that access, they were allowed that freedom to participate on the world stage, then absolutely, positively, China could exert world power, and it could be a good power, a power for good. Another question I've been getting is, if China is putting billions and billions of dollars into their propaganda campaign, their soft power campaign, you have a lot of opposing voices out there. You have the people that are 100% certain that China is going to be what replaces the US on the world stage, and I think that's just utterly impossible. I think there's huge demographic issues with that. The country is not replacing itself. When you had the one-child policy, you've created a ton of single children that now have the responsibility of taking care of their parents and grandparents that simply can't afford to do so. The country's growth didn't match what the responsibility for the kids are. So you have a new generation of people that are able to have as many children as they want. China got rid of the one-child policy, but people are not doing that. In fact, the fertility rate has never been really lower. I saw more people having kids when the restrictions were there. People don't want to have children in China because it's a financial burden, and the government set it up in a way that they don't want to bring kids into a world that have to take care of all of these things. Because believe it or not, you might not believe this, China doesn't have social safety nets. It is called the Communist Party of China. It's the communist China. It's a socialist principles, socialist values, core socialist values, all this kind of stuff. But China does not have safety net. It doesn't have any semblance or real protection or care for its citizens. When you retire, you don't necessarily get anything worthwhile. It's like state capitalism with no real checks and balances and an authoritarian government reigning over you, making sure that you don't step out of line. It's not really a conducive environment to bring children into for a lot of people, so they're simply not doing so. That's a huge issue. In what realm is China able to project its power around the world in terms of entertainment or just being cool? Almost none. This is why the Chinese government really doesn't like South Korea, is that this tiny country has managed to infiltrate American social identity. People in the US sing Korean language songs from Korea. They dress like Korean people. This tiny little place over in East Asia has managed to exert so much soft power, like Japan did, in the West, that it's impossible to argue how cool it is. People think Korea and Japan are fantastically cool countries in the West, and China hasn't managed to do that. And unfortunately, America has shown time and time again is that Hollywood, TV shows, entertainment, fashion, food, drink, all this kind of stuff is sometimes more important than just globally exerting your power through politics. You need people's hearts and minds to think that you're relevant or to pay attention to your message. And the US has pulled that off fantastically. Korea has as well, and so has Japan, and some of Europe to a certain extent. China has not managed to do that whatsoever. So no, it can't replace the US from that perspective. And then you have the opposing voices that will say like, China's on the brink of collapse. China's on the brink of collapse. The Three Gorges Dam can't survive another flood, and if that goes, then the whole, mandate of heaven is gonna happen. Mandate of heaven is basically when something disastrous happens in China, which signifies that the leadership should change, right? That's an ancient Chinese thing. You know, they're like, how can you have a genocide? How can you have the, dam collapse that would displace millions of people? How can you have all these restrictions on freedom? And then the people don't rise up. Of course, it's going to fragment and it's going to fall apart overnight. And like, we got to be ready for the collapse of China, all this kind of stuff. Again, if you're looking at that through a Western lens, it's not that China is some mystical, magical land which we can't understand. That's not what I'm trying to say. But it's trying to look at China as if it's a completely failed state, which it's not. The government exerts control over the people, which means the state is absolutely functional, if not one of the more functional states in this world. It may be unfair, it may be inhumane, it may be completely lopsided, but it is there and it is functional. It does maintain a semblance of order over the people, and that doesn't mean that they have to like their situation. That doesn't mean the people in China are standing up cheering for the fact that they're in these massive lockdowns and they have little to no personal freedoms and they're separated from their families and that the income inequality is outlandish and that they're constantly soaking up lies and brainwashing because there's no free media. It doesn't mean that people are okay with that, but it doesn't mean that everything's on the brink of collapse, because China under Xi Jinping has managed to take the security apparatus and make sure that people don't step out of line and make sure that the state exerts absolute control. We've seen time and time again, whether it's the outbreak of coronavirus in Wuhan or any other massive disaster that could signify the mandate of heaven or the collapse of the government or whatever, the government's managed to stifle, since 1989, Tiananmen Square massacre, the government's managed to successfully stifle anything bad that could come out and challenge its rule. So I don't see that happening. Again, I think the truth is a lot more nuanced. The truth is that China is on a trajectory to really exert its power around the world and try to act like the next world superpower. And I think that's way premature. I think China is absolutely nowhere near ready. I don't think it's militarily ready. I don't think it militarily could compete with anyone, with any major superpower, let alone the US. I don't think China has the capability, the wealth, or the organization, or the party leadership to exert itself past its borders. But I think within its borders, it's created the beginnings of a massive hermit state that could probably self-sustain for quite some time. And I think that's the trajectory that we're seeing China go on. They tried the Belt and Road Initiative. It's widely failing in many different countries. It's trying to exert influence over countries' politics and things like this, but it's now sort of coming to terms with the fact that, okay, maybe that's not going the way we had planned. Maybe we'll stick to the South China Sea area. Maybe we'll stick to getting influence from these countries in terms of grain or food resources or iron ore or rare earth material, these kind of things that we can use domestically. I think we're seeing China in the initial stages of a full close off, North Korea style. That might take some time to come to fruition. I don't think we're seeing China on the brink of collapse, and I also don't think we're seeing China able to take over the world in a meaningful way, if that makes sense. I think we're seeing a very paranoid country closing itself off to the rest of the world and trying to make sure that it can functionally exert its power over its populace to make sure that they don't cause any sort of disturbance to the order within the government. And you see that through things like cutting up people's passports, the whole travel ban, not letting Chinese people out, the lockdowns, military preparations, all this kind of stuff. They're all signals and signs of a country that is really making sure that nothing is gonna go down and that they can continue to stay in control of their people. I hope I answered that question that has been burning my inbox over and over again, probably every single day for the past 3 years. So I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate your support over on patreon.com/Laowinner86. All of you guys that support me there are the only reason that I can do this, because a lot of my videos get demonetized due to the sensitive nature of what I cover, and a lot of advertisers don't want to touch me because I talk about China and their supply chains are there. So anything you guys can throw up my direction, I really appreciate it. Like I said, it's the only way I can actually do this. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't subscribed already. I really appreciate it. It's the only way you're going to be able to see my videos pop up when I actually put them out, because I do put out weekly videos. And I want to say thank you so much, Laowinners, and I'll catch you on the next one.